Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We have a great show today. We're going to be talking about fraud investigations and the SEC, what to do, what to know. So joining me to answer those questions is Cindy Fornelli, who's the Executive Director for the Center of Audit Quality. Cindy, welcome back.
Thank you, TK.
So CAQ has done a lot of work with the fraud collaboration and
the anti-fraud collaboration.
I'm sorry, anti-fraud collaboration.
You don't want to foster
Right,
fraud.
right. And to raise awareness of the practices and what should be done. One example of that is the collaboration webcast you hosted with experts from the boardroom, C-suite. By the way, your video series, if people haven't seen those, it's worth going to CAQ and viewing those. Anyway, that was a perfect example of what you've done with the anti-fraud. Based on all of that, what surfaced as the most important steps management can take when they sort of uncover a potential fraud?
Well, it was really exciting, the webcast, and thank you for that plug. I would definitely encourage your viewers to go to the CAQ website and see that webcast. It's free of charge. But the primary message, or one of the primary messages from that webcast is it's not what you do after you discover a fraud. Some of the most important things that a company, whether it's management or the board of directors, can do is before a fraud is uncovered. And we all know that you cannot prevent fraud. If somebody is keen on committing or perpetrating a fraud, it's really hard to prevent that. So what's important is early detection. And so one of the things that a board of directors and a management can do at a company is have protocols in place if indeed they uncover a fraud. Now, hopefully they won't, but having those protocols in place, knowing what you're going to do, who you're going to contact, who needs to be in the room, who needs to make those decisions, will make dealing with a potential fraud once it's uncovered much easier. And so that is an important message that I would hope people would come away from this segment on is, have that conversation in your boardroom. Who's our outside counsel going to be? If we need a PR firm to help us with reputational risk, who is that going to be? And make those contacts ahead of time so that when you're in that moment, which is a very frightening and disconcerting time for a board of directors and for management, you don't have to make those decisions, but those decisions have already been made.
Even though it's not a crisis yet, the prep for that is the same as crisis management for a cyber attack, for reputational attack, any of those. The board must be prepared or else it ends up to be an unpleasant fire drill.
Oh, that's right. And if you are the subject of an SEC investigation, I dare say it's going to be an unpleasant experience, but you can make it easier on yourself by being prepared ahead of time.
So we're specifically talking to boards part of this. So the board is notified of the situation. At that moment in time that it hears that there's a potential of a fraud, okay, what's the board's role?
Well, an important thing will be the independent directors of the board, because you're not going to know the extent of the potential fraud until you've done a bit of an investigation yourself. So having the independent board members lead that internal investigation is often helpful. And I think that's the best practice, that the independent directors will get together and lead the investigation. And then you're going to want to call your outside counsel. You're going to want to call, maybe if there's a financial statement element to it, you're going to want to call maybe forensic accountants. Probably your outside counsel will hire those independent forensic accountants in order to maintain attorney-client privilege. But these are things that your outside counsel can help you. And again, because you don't know the extent of what's happening inside the company, having an outside party help you manage that is very important, I think.
So the next thing I want to talk about is really the toughest, and that is you have this information, and the government's made it clear that they look upon you favorably if you take actions yourself. But you don't want to report, you don't want to self-report if it's an incident that doesn't warrant self-reporting. But that's never clear.
No,
okay?
It's not.
So when you come to that crossroads, what do you tell boards of directors relative to the issue of to self-report or not?
Well, the webinar that you spoke of, that we spoke of at the beginning, actually is the focus of that, is on self-reporting. And we actually had an SEC senior official there from the Division of Enforcement at the SEC talking about what their expectations are and what they would like to see. And there is some help out there for companies to help them and boards of directors to help them through this. And I would recommend everybody go online and pull up the SEC's, it's 2001 actually, it's called Seaboard. The Seaboard was the name of the company, and it's a report. And in that, the SEC outlines the credit that you can get or the factors that the SEC considers when giving somebody credit for self-reporting. And it's every one of these cases is all facts and circumstances based, which is part of the reason it makes it so hard.
Yeah.
There's not a point where it's, now's the time. You really have to analyze your particular facts and circumstances, which I know is a very unsatisfactory answer. But if you look at the Seaboard report, it outlines 4 considerations that the SEC makes. And that is, did the company self-report? That will impact the penalty that you receive. How good is the company at self-policing? So how did the company find this out? The company uncover itself through its compliance processes and procedures? That's a factor. Cooperation. How helpful was the company? So if it's a company that has overseas operations, did the company get the relevant documents translated, or did they require the SEC to do it? So those are also things, a factor that goes in, the cooperation. And then remediation. What has the company done to fix the problem? So these are all factors that the SEC will consider when they are giving you credit for coming in and talking to the SEC about what penalties they might assess. And so the other thing that's important to note is that the SEC will give credit both to an organization or an individual. So even if your company isn't going to self-report, an individual can go in and self-report. And some of the factors that the SEC considers there is the degree of assistance that the individual provided, the importance of the underlying matter. Was it a big matter, or was it something relatively insignificant? What is the interest of the SEC in holding others in the organization accountable? And then the profile of the person who came in and self-reported. So these are other factors that the SEC considers. But one thing that a board of directors and a company should know is a factor that the SEC doesn't really talk about, but that's out there and that you need to consider is, if you don't self-report, others may report for you. We have the whistleblower rules. We have competitors sometimes will call the SEC and tell the SEC that they should investigate a company. Financial news outlets will sometimes do analyses and see that something seems to be off base. Disgruntled employees can call in. So there's a lot of ways that the SEC can get a report of potential fraud, not just from the company. And so it's a hard calculation to make, but you will get credit if you self-report. But that's a tough decision to make, I know.
Well, and that's where we always talk about board leadership, and that's where board leadership is important again, and having somebody that understands the nuances of this, or maybe even reels in a rogue director at that point who wants to fight or do something like that.
Yeah.
So.
And I will say this, if you're going through a full-fledged SEC investigation, I think you must cooperate.
Yeah.
It'll just make your life much more difficult if you don't. You should expect that it's going to be very complex and very time-consuming. I mean, for the directors who are overseeing the internal investigation and the SEC's investigation, it will amount to a full-time job during that period. So that's one of the things that I hear the most from board directors, is that I didn't realize how difficult and complex it was going to be.
And don't forget our first point. If you aren't prepared, it is even worse.
Much worse.
So where can, I know you guys at the CAQ have done a report on the anti-fraud collaboration. So where can people get a copy of this?
So if you go to the CAQ's website, www.thecaq.org, or antifraudcollaboration.org, the latest report is on there. There are several reports. It's called Addressing Challenges in Highly Subjective and Complex Accounting Areas. So in that, we list out best practices in an analysis that we did of SEC enforcement cases involving auditing and accounting issues. And this is where this topic of self-reporting came up. We had SEC, senior officials of the SEC at these two roundtables that led to the report, and one of them just happened to mention the cooperation program, and we kind of got off topic because the directors and management in the room were so interested in how it works and what thought processes the SEC thinks of when they're giving credit for self-reporting. And so that led to the webinar, and that led us to talking about it today.
Well, I'm assuming that all your videos and whatever are also available on your site. It's a good site for board members to go into for gathering all kinds of great information.
And everything's publicly available and free of charge. You
Yeah.
don't have to ask for it. You don't have to get copyright permission if you want to use it elsewhere. It's yours for the taking.
Well, Cindy, thanks again this is a great topic. We've always had great interest in anything connected with the fraud, so I'm sure this show will equally have a lot of interest, and thanks for taking the time to join us. And that will conclude this episode of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.